Thank you everyone for joining us for this webinar incorporating Martin Mac Encore and ELP into modern lighting design presented by Paul Collison. My name is Laura Lawrence and I'm the Global Marketing Director at Harman. So just a few things before we get started. Everyone on the call is muted to keep down noise levels during the webinar. However, there is a Q&A function where you can submit questions to the presenter and he'll try to answer as many questions as possible at the end. This webinar is being recorded and the link will be made available a few days after this presentation. Just to let you know, we have a number of other webinars taking place over the next few months for audio, lighting, video, and control. And we'd like to encourage you to take a look at the different webinars in our Learning Sessions workshop series that can be found on pro.harman.com. We're adding new sessions daily, and we have over 20 sessions scheduled for the remainder of July and August, so watch for those on your calendar. And now I'd like to introduce you to Paul Collison, the presenter for today's webinar. Paul has over 25 years of experience in various facets of lighting design, including multi-camera broadcast, dance, opera, theater, fashion, large-scale public events, and video content creation, as well as video mapping and replay systems. Paul works extensively throughout the Asia-Pacific region and beyond. And now I'll pass it over to you, Paul.
Great. Thank you very much, Laura. Welcome to everybody. Thanks for joining us today. Thanks for giving us your time. I hope we can make it worthwhile for you. While we're on the thank yous, I wanted to thank Show Technology for allowing us to present from their office today. We've had a few internet worries, so we're held together with sticky tape and blue tack at the moment. So with any luck, we'll keep it together all the way through to the end of the presentation. Like Laura said, it'd be great if you could, if anything through the presentation piques your interest, if you have a question, if I haven't maybe covered a certain subject to the degree that you'd like, then please feel free to drop a question in that chat window, because we'll try and leave the last 15, 20 minutes or so for a bit of a discussion, because I feel that's when it becomes the most valuable. And I think even I'd get bored of hearing myself talk for 40 minutes. Okay. So this session, it's a bit of a mouthful, incorporating Martin Mac Encore and ELP into modern lighting design. It's probably more apt just to call it why I think Mac Encores are cool. And I think that's kind of where the whole theme of this came from. The Mac Encore series and now the ELP fixtures have become a bit of a favorite of mine over the last couple of years. And I'm going to take you through a bunch of the reasons as to why that is, and to why there aren't too many shows where I wouldn't have one of these types of fixtures, or both, or all. All right. So in order to do that, though, we're kind of going to go back to the beginning so that we can put a few things into context. So, starting off with my history from Martin, the first moving light that I ever used was one of these little puppies, a 1004 RoboScan with the little rack controller, and they were incredible pieces of technology at the time. And we look back on them now with a certain degree of fondness and also frustration. But this was I guess the start of my lighting career, but also the start of my interaction with moving lights or intelligent lights. Now at this time, moving lights were really just frou-frou, color and movement, mainly, you know, discos and bands. You'd hardly see anything on television. The light levels weren't high enough out of these kind of fixtures. But it was really the beginning of it all. But it wasn't really until the Mac 500s and Mac 600s came along that moving lights, for me, really became a bit of a thing. I think, as I said in my last presentation, I wasn't part of the Very Light Club. So for me, the first real moving lights I got to use were the Martin Mac 5s and 6s, which were a staple of all of our shows, geez, through the 90s and early 2000s, or the latter part of the 90s at least. And so, and we go from those through the Mac 2000s. So there's a massive range of Martin fixtures there that have really permeated different points in my career. But really, right up until the launch of the Encore, any moving light, whether it be for Martin or anybody else, was generally resigned to the artistic side of things. So gobo projection, aerial effects, all of those other things. We really didn't use moving lights to light people's faces, or use them in theatre shows to a massive degree where we were actually lighting scenery and people. Those sort of jobs were resigned to fixtures like the parcan, and the parcan kind of came about. The point I'm going to make here is that a lot of these instruments, like the parcan, like the Fresnel, the profile to a lesser degree, all came from different industries or different applications that were never truly designed for our theatrical perspective. So, the parcan came from aviation, the Fresnel lens came from lighthouses, or the parcan came from aviation and the automotive industry. I mean, they were car headlights for a long time. When it comes to lighting instruments, we're really probably only in the last, I don't know, 10, maybe 20 years, where we're really starting to see instruments that were actually developed purely for our industry and for our applications. And so that takes me to learning about light. Being a lighting designer is not just about getting 100 Sharpies and creating a cool shape, although there are plenty of people out there that call themselves lighting designers and make a lot of money and have a massive career out of doing such things. But there are a lot of us who use light to light faces, light scenery, and in order to do so, you have to have an inherent understanding of the qualities of light and how it behaves. And through my education, some of it formal, some of it less formal, a lot of it through trial and error, a lot of that side of my knowledge came from using incandescent or tungsten sources, which sit in that 2700 to 3200 Kelvin range of color temperature. Now, you can see here in this list, we start off with a candle, which sits around 1700, so it's really quite warm. The incandescent and tungsten fixtures sit in that 2700 to 3200 range. And then, of course, you go through to the high color temperatures. Now, you'll see on the end there something that we call CRI, which most of you will hopefully have a basic understanding of. And that's the color rendering index. And that will give us, that's a rating we use on different light sources to give us an understanding of the quality of the light. So a metal halide fixture that you would normally see in a factory unit that might light up a rehearsal, like a training center or a car park or factories, that has a relatively low CRI of 60. Sunlight and tungsten lights, of course, have a much higher CRI, closer to 100 being the optimum level. So when it comes back to light sources that we use to light people and light scenery and light things that we want color to render properly, it's important that CRI is quite high. So for those of us that learnt to light with tungsten and incandescent sources, we are used to seeing a relatively high CRI out of our fixtures, so close to 100%. You've probably seen charts like this before, and these will explain a little bit about CRI. You'll see here that the wavelengths in daylight are quite consistent throughout the spectrum. Incandescent fixtures render color beautifully, but then you get to fluorescent lights, which have really big peaks and troughs in different parts of the spectrum. So if you were to light something with a fluorescent light, for example, and these are very generalized charts too, by the way, don't think that they are 100% accurate for every fluorescent fixture or incandescent light. But in general, fluorescent lights have lots of peaks and troughs in their output. So the colors that are rendered that they're lighting aren't necessarily true to form. Halogen fixtures have a beautiful curve. And you'll see down the bottom here, the cool light LEDs and the warm light LEDs in general have a different dynamic as well. I will point out that this is a bit of an older chart, and we can, with modern day LEDs, have a much more refined representation of the color spectrum. So getting back onto my journey with Martin, the first real fixture that I felt definitely in the range that was suitable for lighting faces and for scenery was the TW1, and of course that was a tungsten light source. It had an 80-volt source in it. It had a very limited zoom range, but the TW1 was a favorite for a lot of people for a long time because it was a true light source in a moving light form factor. Now we talk about the zoom, the limited zoom. One of the fundamental problems with getting a tungsten light source to output through a lens array, and I'm going to jump forward 2 steps here, is, excuse me, is harnessing the light and pushing it through the optical chain. And you can see in this very erratic diagram here that the reflector here is harnessing as much light as it can from the source and pushing it through the secondary focal point to go down the optic chain. The big challenge with tungsten was that it required a fairly large aperture to push the light through, which meant lenses needed to be bigger, the lights needed to be longer in order to properly create bigger zoom ranges in the fixtures. So you'll find that in fixtures of the day with tungsten sources like the Source 4 Revolution or the VL1000 had the bigger, they were quite massive fixtures in order to get the zoom ranges required for a professional environment. The VL5 there was probably one of the first well-respected tungsten light sources, but again, it was a theatrical fixture for aerial effects, and we wouldn't really use VL5s too often to light too many things. So I know this is a long journey to get to what could probably be called the start of the presentation, but it's important to note where we've come from in order to understand why the Encore resonates so well with a lot of modern designers. Anybody who's come through this world of tungsten light sources really values a high CRI and a quality of light that's not normally associated with a moving head or an LED. So after a long wait, actually no, I'm going to go back a step too, because there were, no, I'm not going to mention that. That's all right, we'll come back to that. So we finally arrived with the Encore series from Martin, which is obviously LED based. There's the profile, or the performance rather, and the wash unit. And the first thing that I really learnt about these was that they come in a warm white and a cool white, which I have to say, and to be totally honest, I was really disappointed with at the beginning because I really wanted it all to be in one fixture. But once you understand the complications between creating a quality light source and maximizing the output, they actually are very different fixtures and very useful in different applications. So part of what's so special about the Encore series is the fact that they are a fixed color light source. So they use a subtractive color mix with color flags to like a traditional moving light in order to change their colors, which is fine because for the most part, what we're really doing with an Encore fixture is we're using them to light faces and we're using them to light scenery and things that we want the color to be rendered as accurately as possible. One of the great things was that there was a wash light released at the same time as the profile, or not long after. So we have a pigeon pair here. We have two things that complement each other. So instantly in a theatrical environment, you could have a spot fixture and a wash fixture that had identical color attributes and features across the system, which is an incredible advantage. So let's have a quicker look at the warm fixture for a start, and you'll see across the spectrum there that the color rendering is completely evened out compared to the diagram that I showed you earlier with the new modern fixture. The TM30 range has almost every color or virtually hitting the 90s. So it will get you as close to a tungsten fixture as we could probably get right now with an LED fixture. With a CRI greater than 90 means that we can, as accurately as possible, represent the colours and features of the objects that we are lighting. And you'll see here down in the colour evaluation sample, again, we have a broader range of colours that are showing us fairly high scores in each of their ranges. So the other things, I need to have a drink. I haven't talked this much without being interrupted for a long time, so excuse me. So one of the things that first comes to note with the Encore range is the zoom range, 12 to 48 degrees, which is fantastic. It really gives us some versatility in the fixtures. You know, a tighter beam means we can put them further away for some longer shots, and we can actually get out to 48 degrees, which is quite a reasonable zoom range for a moving light these days. Something that was really unthinkable with a tungsten light source in a fixture of this form factor. So having a great zoom range is incredible. The warm white has a light source of 3000K, which is right smack bang in the middle of where we're used to sitting when we talk about a tungsten or halogen light source. As I said, the CRI sits greater than 90. The luminous output figures, I'm not even going to go into because they are a little hard to compare, but I will show you some photos a little bit later on. So initially, when the Encore range came out, it was the warm fixture that really excited me because it was close to what I was used to seeing in a tungsten studio or in a tungsten fashion scenario. And that's the fixture that I actually really thought was going to be my staple fixture for a long time afterwards. So it took me a little while, and pardon the pun, but it took me a little while to warm up to the cold fixture, which, as you can see here, is not quite as accurate in its color representation as the warm, but still has some relatively high scores across the board. Its CRI sits greater than 80, which is still pretty high. And when you think about in a cold environment, we were generally using discharge light sources in follow spots. And it's really only in the last probably 5 to 10 years where we've started to see follow spots, maybe only 5 years, where we've started to see follow spots with a CRI that sits greater than 80. So for a long time in the cold environment, or the higher color temperature environment, we were more than happy to sit at a CRI of 60, 65. So to see a light source coming up to 80 in the cold part of the spectrum is impressive and useful. The zoom ranges are all the same. The CRI sits the same. The output of the cold fixture is a little bit higher, but again, I'll come back to that in a moment. So it was really after some use where I started to realize that the cold fixture on its own was a really special fixture because it, with its slightly higher output than the warm, sorry, Zoom's sending me a strange message. With a slightly higher output than the warm fixture, it meant that we could use it in some environments that were probably larger, a little less forgiving. So we're just going to have a quick look at a show that we did, that we have done each year up until COVID. I think it's going to take a bit of a break next year. But this is the Eurovision Australia Decides show that we do on the Gold Coast. And it's a show I reference a lot, but it's probably because we've got some good documentation and good photos. So I'm going to keep talking about it. This is an aerial view of the plan. The blue fixtures on the plan, and I'll zoom in a little bit here, are the fixtures that are the Encore colds. So this is a smallish kind of stadium that we do this, or arena rather, that we do this show in. And you can see here, we have 4 colds out the front, 2 for a more of a side-on oblique shot, 4 backlights buried up in the back here. And then this guy here is just a real high side fixture for us. So when you think about the fact that there were hundreds of fixtures, I can't even remember how many in this design, the fact that we have 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 11 fixtures here, which are all responsible for lighting faces only, that's a pretty incredible scenario. I'm also going to point out that we didn't use follow spots on this show. So we used a system called Spot Track to turn the Encores into a follow spot. So they were computer operated behind us at front of house, so that we could use the same light source in an either fixed or hard position or as a follow spot, and that was front and back light, which is really important to us because I love the consistency of the light source no matter where we are. So here are a few photos, and again, you can see how many fixtures we have in the background, but there's enough grunt out of our colds for one single fixture here to light our artists on stage with a single backlight. So amongst all of that going on, there's enough level out of those fixtures to do the job. You can see here, strong enough for a good, strong backlight on this artist. And again, she's off-keyed further around from one of those fixtures out on the side to light her and try and start the scenery a little bit. So even though the Encores probably aren't really thought of as an arena or a stadium fixture, I really feel like they can compete in that environment. Again, you can just see how big the scale is of this show, and yet one single little encore is enough to pop out our artists. And so it's incredibly impressive, competing against anti-Vipers. And so I'm just going to show you a little bit of footage. I hope it's not too steppy for you. I've had to turn the audio off because it doesn't quite cut it here, but this will just give you a bit of an understanding of what the Encore colds are competing with here. It's quite sterile without music. All that tight editing. So every one of these faces and backlights is an Encore cold. And what I'd like to show you here, one of the things that I really liked about using the Encores as a key light on this show is the fact that we could change color. So this artist here, we actually dropped an extra fixture on the floor down the front to uplight him for the verses, so we could warm up the color of the fixture for his verses, and then flick to an off-key, an off-axis key. Excuse me. For the bigger moments in the song, and these were the two fixtures out wide here. We had a big jib on this side which is why the key lights are all stacked to the left side here. But you can see even coming around from the far side and giving him a fairly off-axis key, it's all still working, and the versatility of being able to light him from the front and the other off-axis positions really gave us some good options. Now this is a little awards show that we've done a few times in one of the smaller venues here in Sydney. And again, a cold Encore coming in against a big bright LED screen, and they're competing. So the point I'm really trying to make with these couple of videos is the fact that thanks, JD. Are the fact that there is more than enough level out of them to compete for level in some of those bigger environments. And that leads me to my next point, is that not only are the Encores just resigned to face lighting or scenery, same show I was just talking about here, but every fixture is an Encore cold. So all the moving lights you see here on stage are all Encores. So we're now using them in a way that maybe they may have been designed for that, I don't know. But I guess the point is that they are incredibly versatile. And if I can play this now because I can talk over it. But all of the profiles above the stage here are all Encore. So you can see they're snappy enough in their gobo and color changes. Their movements are quick enough that they can actually be used as a real moving light as opposed to just a face light. Of course, all of our key lights in this scenario are all Encores. However, the bulk of the fixtures were being used as moving lights. So you can see here that they really are just as useful and just as good as used as a traditional aerial effect as they are at home, just being used with as a key light or a scenery light. And more than punchy enough, as you can see there. The other cool thing for these is by using the Encores all over the place, is that when somebody comes up with an idea to let's spin the artist around backwards for the first half of the song, we're not scrambling to rehang another key light. We could just choose the most appropriate light to light our talent, and it's exactly the same light source from the back as it is from the front. So we've actually started to realize that it's incredibly useful having bulk Encores on a show as moving lights as well, because they can easily double as a key light or as a backlight as quickly as they can become an effect light. So yeah, the point is very definitely, don't just think of them as a light to light somebody with that. And they're not just a theatre light, as you saw before. Snapping in and out of gobos and colours with their movement makes them incredibly versatile. But we can't always have a billion Encores hanging around. Anybody who's worked on a television show or even a theatre show really has had the producer rock up half an hour before you go to air, all the doors open, and says, oh, by the way, we're going to put a host over here, or we want to do a hosting position over there, or something's going to happen over there. And you can't, you might not have the time to rig another moving light. You might not have the time to, or the money to have spare Encores kicking around. So it was really exciting when the ELP range came out, and we're looking at color engines that are very similar to the Encore series that side by side work incredibly well. And so the warm light fixture, in my opinion, becomes a pair with the Encore warm. So if we're doing a show and we're lighting in at that 3000K level, then I'll make sure we've got a bunch of ELP warms sitting in a case out the back ready to go, so that we can quickly react to new hosting positions that pop up and light people with an almost identical light source. The same with the ELP CL. I'll show you in a moment. The color rendering of those is incredibly similar to the cool white Encores. So these fixtures all of a sudden become incredibly useful and affordable, but using a very, very similar color engine. So jumping straight into the warm white fixture with a 36-degree lens on it, you can see here that the CRI is almost at 97, which is technically a higher quality light source than the Encore warm. High scores in the color evaluation sample, and the spectral distribution is out of this world. And it's unfortunate because when you compare it to the CL, it makes the CL look almost not quite as refined. But you also have to remember that the CRI in the CL is greater than 90. So even though its scores don't look quite as high, or the spectral distribution doesn't look quite as good in the cool part of the spectrum, excuse me, it still scores a greater than 90 CRI. Then with the ability to color mix on top of that, means that you have another layer of options. So if you're starting to use CLs as a backlight, for example, you can still have a high quality key light if your talent needs to spin around, but it also allows you the ability to change color at the click of a switch or the turn of an encoder. So the compact CL is incredibly useful. And if we go back and look at our Eurovision Australia Decides show, you can see that we have our encores everywhere, but we have this hosting position that happens down off stage on the side here. So in order to light that, we need to get a fixture up into this area here. I'm hoping you can see my mouse. But because those trusses were just jam-packed with so many fixtures, you couldn't actually fit an Encore in there. So we pull a CL out of a case in order to key light this hosting position. So it means, oh, I didn't turn the audio off on this one. So this means that we can light our talent for this hosting position with exactly the same light source that we're lighting from the other end. So we're not having to scramble in the truck to change color balances or to paint pictures in order to get them to match. So it's and again, having a couple of ELP CLs in a road case out the back is much cheaper than having some Encores kicking around doing nothing, waiting to be deployed, and also much easier. So the ELP fixtures also come, well, there's a standard range of lenses. So we've got the 19, the 26, the 36, and the 50. There's also a zoom lens that's imminent that we had a bit of a play with yesterday. But there are a couple of things I want to talk about these lenses. First thing, it's not really a negative, but the degrees on these lenses are actually slightly wider than they say. So the 19 degree is probably a little closer to a 21. The 26 is probably a little closer to a 27. So they're a fraction wider than their stated degrees, which isn't necessarily a bad thing. It probably gives you a little bit more forgiveness, especially when you're on the edge with your photometrics. But one of the greatest things about these lenses, and I'm going to change here for a moment, is just their optics. Now, we did some tests in here yesterday with some of the ELP lenses and with some non-native lenses. And you can see here, just with my iPhone, not the world's greatest quality photos, but it's infinitely apparent here that on the left side, the ELP warm white with a non-native 50-degree lens focuses in the middle, but it does get incredibly soft around the outside. And then you look on the right side here, with the ELP warm white 50-degree lens with its native Martin lens on it, and it's crisp all the way around. So that tells me, well, and that's a very interesting story, and there's not much more I can say about that other than the picture tells the story. And then likewise, we had another fitting with a different lens on the left there, and you can see that it's sharpish in the middle, and it definitely is soft on the outside. But if we use the other fitting with the ELP lens, you can see on the right side here just how crisp those ELP lenses are across the field. And playing around with the light meter yesterday, one thing that I really did notice was how even the field is compared to some of the other fixtures that are on the market. So these lenses are, I can't talk them up enough. I mean, the fixtures are great on their own, but the lenses, in addition to the fixtures, really makes the package great. For want of a better term, probably. The other thing I really like about these lenses are you can see here the screws and the tightening screws that help you lock in the focus. It's a very industrial feel to it that allows you to play with the focus in a finite kind of way, but then really lock it off, so it's not going to drift. And it's these little things that make the difference. When you're talking with profiles, they're bitsy, they've got shutters, they've got all these things that hang off them, excuse me. but it's the little things like the focus knobs and the mechanism to do the focus. If you've got 100 of these things to focus, these are the things that you're going to notice. So that just that simple mechanism there, being able to lock off and just make just the slightest adjustments, but then lock that adjustment in, really make these fixtures a pleasure to use. I'm just going to jump through now and then there are some of the other features that really are just so incredibly useful. You know, that we've all, or most of us maybe, have been in a theatre where you are running around. You might be working on your own. There might only be you and a board op. And you're running around trying to focus things and you're screaming out, hey, can you bring up channel 427, please? And that person has to walk from one side of the room to the other. Well, with these, you can just rock up to the back of them and push the enter button in, and the fixture will power up to full, allowing you to focus and give you 30 or 60 seconds to focus the fixture before it goes back to DMX control. So, you know, little things like that, which make life so much easier for you, particularly when you're working on your own or with a few people. You know, those little things can save you so much time. The standalone modes in the CL version, we did a show at the end of last year where we just had a gobo projection onto a wall that was part of an artistic exhibition, and we just needed the fixture to turn on every day at a certain time and turn off. But we wanted it to cycle through colors, so we didn't want to have to add a control system. So the programming within the fixture allows you to cycle through X amount of presets with a predefined fade time. So we could just literally stick a timer on the wall and the fixture would turn on at 5 o'clock every day, go through its cycle of colors, and then at midnight it would turn off. So again, you know, another simple feature that just allowed us to do our job without having to add a control system or add other elements in. Of course, both the ELPs have a strobe mode. RDM works with them. Variable PWM dimming if you need to adjust for refresh rates for camera and whatnot. Oh, excuse me. Again, so not used to talking. So the ELPs, you know, on their own, and it's funny how we've combined them into this presentation, but on their own, they are incredibly useful and high quality fixtures. I think these pictures here really show the efficiency of the lenses, even if they don't probably pass as much light as some other products. And we're only talking fractions here. The trade-off is the crispness and the uniformity across the field, which is something that I really, really like. And combine that with the refined color engines in both of these fixtures, and it really makes it just makes your job easier at the end, because you're not having to fight the technology. I think, you know, when you're fighting technology in order to get the end result, that can get quite exhausting. So having fixtures like these that almost make it a pleasure to do your job is what's important. And that kind of brings me to the end of the presentation that I've put together. You know, I know I kind of probably rushed through a few things, and I'm really interested to get some questions and a bit of feedback. But yeah, Laura, how are you?
Good. Thank you. That was a really great presentation. We do have a question in here asking about viewing the replay. I'm assuming that you're talking about the recording that we do of the webinar. And we do have the recordings for all of the webinars that we do out on our YouTube channels. So if you go to Martin Professional, give it probably 3 days, we should have this one posted as well if you wanted to watch it or share that link with a friend. Let's see. Nathan, did you have any questions come in on your end?
I did not. I think Paul covered it very nicely. So I think maybe something that's interesting to talk about would be more about the Encore Cold and did you and how it works together with like the ELP warm white. Do you ever put those two together, or?
Yeah, absolutely. I think, and this probably brings me back to something I said earlier, where my initial reaction when I heard or realized that there were two SKUs in this line, there was the cold and the warm. There's an element of frustration because I think, oh, great, whenever I want a warm, only the cold's going to be available. Whenever I want the colds, only the warms are going to be available. I'm going to build my show in Sydney with colds, and I'm going to go to New York, and they're only going to have warms available. One of the great things I think you guys did was create the emulation modes in both fixtures so that the warm could run like a cold and vice versa. So I've been in several instances where I've had cold fixtures but run them as warm fixtures and used the CL as the accompanying, not the CL, sorry, the warm white as the accompanying profile. And again, you know, the uniformity between the two and the fact the color engines are so incredibly close. You're not fighting the technology for once. You're actually going, oh, geez, I want this cold light to look warm. Oh, and it does, and it matches this warm profile over here. And that is incredibly useful. I do have some charts that have those things overlaid, but I feel in this environment it's probably a little hard to look at and properly display, you know, comparing the warm and the cold and where they sit in the color spectrum. So if anybody desperately wants to see that, obviously just let me know. But I'm invariably finding myself in situations where I need a cold, but there are only warm fixtures. And sure, the trade-off is the output is restricted. But I found that as long as you can deal with the output difference in the terms of your show, that I'm quite happy substituting, a warm for a cold or vice versa, based on availability, depending on some of those other little caveats.
Okay, it looks like that was it for, oh, wait, here's one. Question for Paul. Can you nuance a little more about the factors for you choosing between the colds and the warms?
Yeah, absolutely. So the factors for me are obviously where you're choosing your show to sit with color temperature. So if I'm and a lot of times that is determined by other factors. So, for example, if I go back and have a look at one of these, we can go back and have a look at some of these photos. So, you know, this show here, the Eurovision Australia Decides show, we shoot this in a colder color temperature. So, and the reason for that is that if we've got cold from the front and we're using discharge fixtures from behind, then the colors of our fixtures are more accurately represented. We don't need to get the video screen to rebalance to a lower color temperature. So it's easier to honor the integrity of the fixtures if you work in their natural color space. And again, this show here, we shoot in a high color, or this year, for example, we shot in a high color temperature, and we had Encore colds, so everything sat in its native space. Where the warms I really like using when we are using tungsten fixtures, for example. So if we are looking at using, Mulfay audience blinders, or you're after that warmer look, then, or you're doing a show in an environment that has existing architectural lighting that's warm, then you might want to sit in that warmer environment. So therefore you would color balance to warm, to that 3000K range. When you start looking at theatre shows, for example, that you can then become, to a degree, you're the master of your own domain there, because you can sit in whichever color space you want to. Although, generally speaking, most theatre shows probably sit in that cooler, they're all based around the fact that it's a cool follow spot that's coming in. So everything is based around that temperature. In fashion, we tend to do cold color temperatures for the majority of things, but when you start looking at swimwear or you have people exposing more skin, then you might want to sit in a warmer environment. But if you're doing your show outdoors at dusk, then maybe you don't want it to be warm because the color shift between the cool daylight and the warm light becomes a bit much. Unfortunately, look, the actual answer to the question after all that blabbering is that there is no cut and dried formula for choosing which way to go color temperature wise. Sometimes it's based on fixture availability. Most of the time it's based on trying to sit in the native color temperature of anything that emits light in the space. So video screens, windows that might go to the outdoors, LED technology. So trying to sit in the native color space is probably one of the biggest aims.
Okay, it looks like that was the last question that came in. So if anybody has additional questions, you can feel free to email me and I can get that question over to Paul. And then I think on that final slide, you had your Instagram information, right, Paul?
I do, yes, there it is.
Perfect.
Down the bottom there, a personal one and a company one. They all involve light in some way, shape, or form.
All right, super. Well, thank you, Paul. It's always a pleasure to have you present for us. We really appreciate you coming back and doing the second session.
No worries. Thank you for having me.
And thank you, everyone, for attending. We're so appreciative of all of the time that you've been giving to us for these webinars. I see a lot of familiar names on there, so I know that you're coming back again and again. And I just want to thank you so much for joining us. I hope that these sessions have been helpful, and hopefully we'll see you at the next one. So have a great day, everyone. Thanks.
Thanks,
Bye,
Laura.
Paul.
Thanks, everyone.